On May 27, 1995, film and comic book fans around the world were met with shocking news they could hardly wrap their heads around. Christopher Reeve, star of stage and screen, had been involved in an equestrian accident and was fighting for his life in a Virginia hospital. 5 days later, Reeve recovered full consciousness, but woke to a startling new reality for himself. The accident had shattered his first and second vertebrae. He was now paralyzed from the neck down and required a ventilator to breathe. For a generation of fans who had grown up on Reeve's portrayal of Superman, it was hard to comprehend. With 1978's Superman the movie and its 3 sequels, Reeve had famously made audiences believe a man can fly. Now, he could no longer walk. It seemed a particularly dark irony for the strapping star who became famous for playing the mightiest superhero of them all. An irony made even stranger with the realization that Reeve's most recent acting job was the 1995 TV movie Above Suspicion, which first aired just a few days before the accident, and starred Reeve as a police officer who was paralyzed from the waist down. Reeve had even visited paralysis rehabilitation centers to prepare for the role, later admitting he had left those meetings thinking how lucky he was that he didn't really have to deal with the struggles of those individuals. After initial bouts of depression and consideration of allowing himself to be removed from life support, thoughts he put aside after realizing how much his children still needed him, Reeve decided to put the same determination and optimism his Superman was known for into his now real-life struggle. Vowing to walk again, Reeve and his wife Dana partnered with the American Paralysis Association to found the Christopher Reeve Foundation, dedicated to both improving the quality of life for individuals with disabilities and seeking potential cures for paralysis caused by spinal cord injuries and neurological disorders. And Reeve would also return to film work, both behind the camera, directing 2 well-received TV movies, 1997's In the Gloaming and 2004's The Brooke Allison Story, but also in front of the camera. In 1998, 3 years after his accident, Reeve produced and starred in a remake of Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, for which he won a Screen Actors Guild Award. And, perhaps fittingly, Reeve's final on-screen work would be a guest role on the CW series Smallville, about a young Clark Kent's life before becoming Superman. Reeve played a good-hearted doctor who gives Clark information about his true alien origins, and mentors him on how to use his powers for good, in scenes underscored by John Williams' classic 1978 Superman theme. Sadly, in October of 2004, Reeve went into cardiac arrest after receiving an antibiotic for an infection he had been battling. He fell into a coma and passed away 18 hours later, at age 52. Tragically, 10 months later, his widow, Dana, was diagnosed with lung cancer, potentially caused by years of exposure to secondhand smoke when she was a young lounge singer. She passed away 7 months later. 1 year later, the Christopher Reeve Foundation announced it was being renamed the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. Today, Christopher's 3 children are all board members, and while Christopher Reeve unfortunately never realized his dream to walk again, the work he did during his final years of advocacy did and continue to have a giant impact on the world of paralysis research, with many around the world living better, more comfortable lives, and some even taking real steps they were never sure possible because of Christopher and Dana's foundation. And of course, his cinematic legacy remains. For many, Reeve is and always will be their Superman. But while that was the role that defined and even somewhat pigeonholed Reeve, a fact he understandably had mixed emotions about throughout his adult life, a closer look at Reeve's career reveals a number of underappreciated, waiting to be rediscovered non-Superman performances. And his impact on film even goes beyond his acting and directing. Just as he had once met with paralyzed individuals to research his role in Above Suspicion, in 1999 Reeve met and consulted with one of Hollywood's biggest stars, who himself had recently signed on to play a quadriplegic detective in an upcoming adaptation of a hit novel. The year is 1999, and Universal Pictures and Columbia Pictures are ready to team that Hollywood megastar with an up-and-coming actress on the brink of mega-stardom for what they hope will launch the next big crime thriller franchise with The Bone Collector. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris, having collected many a bone as a young boy watching Angelina Jolie's career.
I knew it. I knew it. See, I was at the beginning, I was gonna say, okay, I know we're doing a movie called The Bone Collector. I know it's an Angelina Jolie movie. How many bone collection jokes should we limit ourselves to this episode? You've already got one.
And you said one to me right before we recorded as well.
We did.
So
I did.
we
Yeah, I can't. I'm not innocent here. Like
so I'm gonna say we're allowed seven.
seven. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Very important, very relevant number for this
Very,
episode.
very.
Yes. And this episode, as our I was gonna say longtime listeners, but actually you only have to listen to one episode previous to know. If you listen to the last episode, you know this is the second episode in our November series, as we like to dub it, Noyce-vember. And that is two episodes dedicated to one of our favorite journeyman directors. This is actually our third time covering him. There will be more even in the future. But Phillip Noyce, the Australian director, we looked at The Saint last time, and now
Mhm.
we're jumping on ahead to his next film, 1999's The Bone Collector. Chris, tell us a little bit about it.
For sure. It is written by Jeremy Iacone, or Iacone. What do you think it is?
I'd say Iconie, but
Iacone. I'll do it
I'm
again.
an
Let
idiot,
me.
so who knows?
Oh, okay. Well, now I got to keep it in. I'm not really familiar with his body of work.
Hmm.
IMDb also wasn't much help. So this guy hasn't done much, but this is based on the novel series by Jeffrey Deaver. He's
Yeah.
the OG author of the 1997 novel of the same name. There's 16 novels in this series, by the way. It started
Yeah.
in 97, and the last one actually came out in 2023. So it's still relevant in a
Oh
lot of
yeah,
ways.
I'm aware. I'm aware. Trust me. As you know, I work in a bookstore, and I'm very aware that this is still a series that's chugging along.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
The budget of the film, $73 million. Domestically, it made 66.5 million, and worldwide, it was a little bit of a hit here. It made $151 million. So back in 1999, not too shabby. Not too shabby.
Yeah. No, this is definitely not one of those like, oh, it just bombed, and so of course there's no sequel. We'll talk later about why we think there might not have been a sequel, and obviously we'll talk about if we think it deserved one. But
Mhm.
yeah, this is one of those like every once in a while we get to do a legit hit, and I'd even say not as much as maybe some other movies we've looked at, but I think this is a movie that at least has a little bit held on in like the public conscious. I do see people talk about this movie still. I think it comes up when like different lists are made. Maybe we'll talk about those kind of lists, like what kind of genre this falls into.
Mhm.
But I feel like it's a movie that's still it's we should even say maybe this is jumping ahead just a little bit, but it still has enough name recognition that even recently they tried to like resurrect it in a TV form. So it's still out there.
Yeah, I mentioned it to a few people in my inner circle that we were doing this movie, and right away they were like, "Oh yeah, that's the Angelina Jolie movie," or "That's the one with Denzel, sits in a bed the whole time." So like it's it's held on in some respect. Oddly enough, wasn't critically hailed really at all.
No.
I was surprised going in by that, especially with the level of star power and at the
Mhm.
time, right? Denzel Washington, Angelina Jolie. So, and
I think one of the reasons it held on though is it came around at just that right time too. This was definitely like a cable staple and like a
mm,
video store staple,
mm.
after its initial theatrical run. But this is one that I remember running on cable like all the time when it hit TV.
I guess, I mean, we have to start. Let's start a little bit with Philip Noyce, the man of the hour, right? We
Hmm.
talked about him quite in depth in the last episode, The Saint from 1997. So this one, we're going to try our best not to kind of repeat everything we said about the guy. But,
Yeah.
actually this week, I went back and I watched his Jack Ryan films and what was it, Patriot Games and
Clear and
Clear and
Present
Present
Danger.
Danger.
Yeah.
Two movies, very, very dependable. And
Yeah.
Patriot Games, I liked. I didn't love it, but I loved
Hmm.
Clear and Present Danger. I thought that
That's kind
movie
of where
was
I fall too.
awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because he's an Australian filmmaker, as you said earlier, but boy, does he know how to cut off a slice of meatloaf Americana, cinematic meatloaf Americana. Because, dude, those movies, they cook, and I like them.
You said dependable, and dependable is like the ultimate word for those. And as we said last time, dependable is just kind of the ultimate word for his overall filmography. But yeah,
Mhm.
especially those two Jack Ryan movies, that's like, obviously they don't really hold a candle to John McTiernan's Hunt for October. You can see like a noticeable dip like right away,
Yes, yes.
but they're definitely strong enough to keep the franchise going. Harrison Ford is a obviously very, very capable Jack Ryan, even though I do prefer Alec Baldwin. But they're all like upper echelon dad movies, as we like to say.
Definitely.
These are dad, as we talked about last time. These are dads standing in the living room watching them on TNT movies, and they hit that bill. But man, they scratch an itch, and they're just like eminently watchable. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I have one more observation about Phillip Noyce I want to
Oh,
just
sure.
throw
Go
in
ahead. Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
one new observation that way. So this came to me watching this movie. So just a peek ahead a little bit into the plot of this movie. Not too much. We'll talk about it more later. But every director or a lot of directors have their kind of kinks, right? Their fetishes.
Yeah,
Everyone
yeah.
makes fun of Tarantino for his obsession with feet. Alfred Hitchcock was obsessed with leggy blondes. I think it's safe to say Phillip Noyce, watching these two movies in a row, might have a thing for movies where protagonists have to stick together small little pieces of paper to decipher clues. How weird is it that we watched two movies in a row? I mean, there are two movies in a row from him that both hinged on that narratively.
That's great.
Yeah.
You're bringing that to my attention right now. But I excised all knowledge of the Saint 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So
Good one.
unfortunately. But okay, this movie, of course, the book is a big hit. But there's also another movie that came out earlier,
Seven.
by David
Mhm.
Fincher. Really set off this, oddly enough, this copycat syndrome of movies trying to be Seven, almost like copycat serial killers in a lot of ways. So this movie,
Which is funny because one of the movies that falls into this movie called Copycat
yeah, there you go. There you go.
with Sigourney Weaver. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a really hard-hitting question here, Trev.
Okay.
Is Seven a good movie?
Okay, let me think about this. Hmm. No, Seven's not a good movie. Seven's a fucking great movie. Seven is one
Yes.
of the best
Yes.
American films of the 90s.
Yeah.
And I remember, and there are movies that are really good and there are movies that are huge hits, but Seven falls in that, you just alluded to it, falls into that rare quality of these movies are just like totemic and these like seismic changes in cinema, right? These movies that come along
Hmm.
and suddenly everybody wants to imitate them. You think of a Pulp Fiction, you think of The Matrix, uh, to a lesser degree, like sometimes it's the style. Like after Avatar, everything had to be 3D,
Yeah.
right? But Pulp Fiction and Matrix are better like analogs because it's like everyone tried to ape the style of those movies, and that's true with Seven as well. And I really even remember. I don't think I've ever had a chance to tell this story on this podcast before. I don't know if Seven's come up before, but I remember going to see Seven in the theater, being kind of like, whatever. I wasn't super excited about it because at that point, I still did think of like Brad Pitt as kind of a pretty boy actor. I was like
Right.
kind of like
Right.
not avoiding his stuff necessarily, but he wasn't an actor that excited me. And we'd had like a lot of just kind of, like the late 80s and early 90s were full of mostly kind of generic, like, just fine kind of cop movies. And I didn't, having not I'd seen Alien 3, but it's not like I was aware of David Fincher yet as a filmmaker, because obviously he kind of dismissed that film himself. He wasn't a part of the big promotion for it. It didn't turn out the way he wanted it to. So we didn't have any sense of who David Fincher was yet either. So we just went to see Seven because me and my family would go see a movie like every weekend, and that was what was out. And holy shit, I just remember sitting in the theater and that movie washes over you. And first of all, right off the bat, the opening credits are set to Nine Inch Nails, and I love Nine Inch Nails. And I was like, oh my God, this was like you didn't expect to see a studio movie using Nine Inch Nails.
Right.
Just, and beyond that, how even incredibly influential and cool those opening credits were, right? You just never seen
Hmm.
anything like that. That opening credit sequence is I still sometimes just hop on YouTube and watch it because it's so great. And yeah, just look, we don't have to relitigate Seven, but just like watching that movie in the theater and especially getting to that end and just feeling in the crowd, like feeling in the theater, everyone knew they were seeing something special, and just feeling everyone wiped, like walking out of the theater feeling wiped out by that ending, as you should.
Hmm.
But just knowing like, oh my God, we just saw like the emergence of a new powerhouse filmmaker. And really, I think you could kind of feel like, I think something just shifted in like the cinematic ether. And sure enough, like everybody suddenly was like, we need our Seven. But that's how I feel. Now, how about I'm going to pose the question to you, Chris. Do you think Seven's a good movie? What if you were just like, no, I think it sucks?
Yeah. It's just a dial tone on my end. I hung up on you like 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, of course, Seven is a masterpiece.
Mhm.
I don't want to use that term lightly, but I truly do think Seven is a masterpiece. And
Yeah.
I think maybe a year ago, maybe even more at this point because time has no meaning, but uh, I invited my sister over for just a movie night. I was like, "What do you want to watch?" And I kind of gave her a couple options, and she chose Seven. And she had never seen it before, and nor
Hmm.
did she know the ending. She's gone this
Yeah.
whole her whole life. She's 30 years old now, and she's gone her whole life. Being, that's how protective I am as an older brother. Not only am I punching dudes, making sure she's got the right fiance, which she does,
Yeah.
but I was also punching those same film geek dudes for not spoiling the ending.
I
But
thought you were gonna say you were trying to protect her from Kevin Spacey movies.
only K-Pax.
Oh, yeah. Good call, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, only K-Pax. Everything else is
Mhm.
fair game. Uh, just like his relationships.
Okay,
Okay.
don't say it. Don't, yeah.
Anyway, we watched it, and just it's a riveting film. It
Hmm.
is depressing as fuck. It never stops raining, right? Like it's
No,
the
it well,
entire film is raining until the end. The
yep.
entire film, I think.
It's raining until the very end. They never name the city, which is
Correct.
like which is awesome. Yeah, there's just so much great stuff about it. I mean, like like you, I've had a couple opportunities in my life and in like more recent years, right, in the last like decade or so, to show that movie to someone who somehow has still not seen the ending or heard about the ending,
Right.
and just like that's so much fun to like just watch them at the ending when that
Oh yeah.
reveal happens. But I will say like one of the powers of Seven is there's a lot of movies that are really enjoyable the first time you watch them because of the twist ending, and then they're never quite the same after.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
I even have that a little bit with The Sixth Sense, which I thought was incredible the first time I saw it, and it's never really been the same experience. But Seven, I think, is a movie that just remains powerful even when you know the ending is coming, because it just infuses the entire movie with this like this, where the overall dread is coming, and just like as the pieces are coming together for the characters, you know where it's heading, and it
Hmm.
makes it even like more dark and depressing. So I think it's kind of all like equally amazing that Seven remains a fascinating watch, and I've watched it multiple times. Obviously, yes, I wish I could go back and forget that ending and experience that again for the first time. But yeah, no, it's definitely it's one of my favorite films of the '90s for sure. And
Yeah.
like yeah,
I'm glad we reviewed it 30 years later.
yeah, yeah. Well, they did. We wouldn't ever include Seven in this podcast, but they did like briefly talk about maybe doing a sequel to it. It wasn't the intention when they made it, but like, do you know about that? Like a while later, suddenly they got a hair up their butt about like, let's try to make a sequel. And there was like this like idea floating around about like the Morgan Freeman character taking on like a supernatural serial killer. And I'm just like,
Oh,
oh my
really?
gosh, so I'm so glad that didn't happen. Yeah.
Hmm. Well, that's a good segue into a little bit of homework I've been doing
Yeah.
in the last couple months. There's a bit of a supernatural thriller that I saw this summer that
Hmm.
kicked it all off. Am I allowed to say that? Do you think
I
I'll
think
say that?
so. Yeah.
Okay, good,
Yeah.
good. Okay, so in July I saw
Long legs.
Yeah.
and the new Nick Cage film. If you
Hmm.
didn't know Nick Cage was in it, you probably still don't know if you even saw it because he's totally transformed in that movie. But I loved it, and I walked away from it feeling very affected by it. It's a serial killer like crime procedural that I haven't seen in a long time, and the sound design is excellent. It's just a wild little movie, and
Hmm.
gives you feelings of Seven and Silence of the Lambs and stuff like that, right? So I thought, huh, I'm pretty sure there's some 90s and early 2000s serial killer thrillers that I haven't seen. So I was going to watch The Bone Collector, funnily enough, but Trev reminded me saying, hey, we got to talk about this one day. And well,
Yeah.
as I do with a lot of movies, and I think we both do this, but we maybe want to watch something and then we got to check with each other if we can even watch it yet. And we
I
might
know.
as well
Yeah.
just wait a couple years before
Yeah.
seeing it. Uh, that's me with Dune right now, the original Dune with
Yeah.
David Lynch. So.
That's me with Fall Guy. I'm just like I wanted to watch this year and then I missed it in the theater and I was like, I guess I might as well just wait now, you know?
So I started out with actually Angelina Jolie's second attempt at a serial killer thriller, only 5 years later, after The Bone Collector. I watched.
Taking lives.
Mm.
Have you seen this movie?
Oh yeah, I've seen Taking Lice. Yeah.
Okay. This one really it did scratch the itch. Like I'm not, by the way, I'm not going to give anything away of these movies. I just kind of want to like briefly talk about them. But this one scratched a little bit of the itch that I was looking for. It's really effective all the way through, and then it gets insanely silly.
Yeah,
in the
that's why
last
because
30
I
minutes.
remember not I don't remember much about it. I just remember kind of not being that taken with it. I'm guessing that probably comes from like the third act, maybe
Yeah.
based on what you're saying. Yeah.
And maybe, I don't know, maybe if you haven't, you probably haven't seen it in 20 years, right?
No, no, yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder if 20-year ago Trev wouldn't like it, but 20-year now Trev would like it because of just how silly it gets.
That's
Just one of those
possible.
things.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, I like that one. I didn't think it was great, but it scratched that itch. And then I moved on to 1997's
Kiss the girls.
with
Hmm.
Morgan Freeman. This was Morgan Freeman's attempt at redoing Seven.
Yeah. Yep.
Uh, this one was okay. I love Ashley Judd. I think I just like love watching her in movies. It's just she's
Hmm.
she's not how do I say this? She is a movie star, but not in like a oddly traditional sense. Does that make any sense? Like I see Ashley Judd as an absolute movie star, but she doesn't have like many box office hits. Would you agree with that?
Well, it's strange because I've never been a huge Ashley Judd fan. I think that's because she did become a movie star, but she became a movie star in like a string of films that were all the same kind of genre that I wasn't interested in. And it
Right.
was all those like very like, and this is going to sound, I'm sorry, this probably sounds very like I'm a dude, right? But they were just like very female driven thrillers that at the time I was not really gravitating towards. And the ones I did watch, like, something like Double Jeopardy, which I remember like kind of watching half of and getting really bored with.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, it's just she was making a lot of movies. I think she is a good actress. I just so it's like that thing where like I wish she was like in more stuff that I enjoyed.
Yeah,
She just did a string that I wasn't super into, but I do remember liking Kiss the Girls though. That's a yeah. I was gonna make a joke about how great the villain is in that movie, but
Oh,
I don't know.
you son of a bitch. Don't bring it up.
I was like, maybe we were dipping into spoiler territory, but yeah,
Long-term listeners, if you go watch Kiss the Girls and well, when you get the reveal, you'll know why
yeah, yeah.
the movie fell apart for me. Oh, okay. Uh, but I like them sharing the screen together. I do
Mhm.
feel it's a little bit too made for TV. It doesn't have the best like visual sense of it, but pretty good, pretty enjoyable.
Well, and that's true. I mean, before you even continue, right? We'll just quickly say like that was like the kind of the problem with all these seven wannabes, right? Is
Yeah.
nobody they didn't have another Fincher ready to go. The only person who was making seven wannabes that had the Fincher feel was Fincher. When he would
Hmm.
go on and
Hmm.
make other serial killer movies like something like Zodiac, which I know is a true story, but it's still the kind of the closest he came to like replicating Seven again. So yeah, everyone wanted to do a Seven, but the style is always what was missing, even if some of these were still, functionable and entertaining, as I would say
T-
Kiss the Girls is. Yeah.
Totally, totally. And then I watched 2002. I love Sandra Bullock, so I
Hmm.
watched.
Murder by numbers.
Now, this is what
Um,
I like. I remember
yes,
liking this one quite a bit. Yeah.
Sandra Bullock. Okay, whatever I said about Ashley Judd, take that back. Sandra Bullock is a fucking movie star, and I
Oh
and
yeah.
I just love seeing Sandra Bullock on screen. Um, she could be just typing in a typewriter like she was, or on the what was that? Was that The Net?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I watched that movie, and that's just a bad movie. But Sandra Bullock's awesome. She's just so. We said it before, even in our Judge Dredd episode. She's just such a welcoming, calming presence. I just love her.
Mhm.
And in my top 10, if I was to say my top 10 of all time right now, I do consider Gravity being in my top 10. So,
I thought you were about to say Murder by Numbers, and I was like, Chris,
oh,
I love you. Or, you're one of my best friends, but
yeah, yeah.
I gotta end this. I gotta end this relationship right
Yeah, no, no, no,
now.
no. No.
Yeah.
I thought Murder by Numbers was okay. It's fun seeing like a baby Ryan Gosling in it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a little bit, predictable, but I
It
think
is. Yeah.
also I had just watched three or four serial killer
Yeah.
thrillers back to back, so that may have tainted my viewing. But again, Sandra Bullock makes it watchable. And then the next one I watched, Trev, you haven't seen this yet, so I'm not even really going to talk about it much. But I watched
Trap.
from
Mm.
2024.
Yeah, no, I'm still waiting to
So
watch that. Yeah.
yeah, so the Josh Hartnett movie. All I'll say, supremely stupid.
And that's what I'm hoping for.
Yes,
So,
yes,
yeah.
extremely stupid. But
Hey,
quite
can you
entertaining.
tell me
So
one thing?
sure.
Can you promise me is the M. Night Shyamalan cameo stupid?
Oh, every time.
Yeah, okay, good.
Every time.
Yeah.
Also, I'm almost. This movie proves again and again. I don't think M Night Shyamalan has ever had any real interactions with real people ever in life. So,
Trap.
I mentioned it earlier. I would say to throw into that pile for, if you're going to keep this going,
yeah.
I would check out
Copycat.
with Sigourney Weaver. That's a
Okay.
fun one that's got like an interesting hook. That's got a really interesting like villain performance too.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's I remember like again like it's probably like a C plus B minus movie, but if
Mhm.
you're like in this mode already of watching all these and enjoying them, that's probably one that you'll have some fun
Cool.
with.
Yeah, no, you know me. I take a lot of your recommendations and I usually watch them right away.
Yeah, or sometimes like 4 years later. So
Well, there's a few.
yeah, there's a few, but that's okay.
There's a few. There's a few.
I trust you.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay.
It's hard when instead I'm asking you to watch like Maximum Ride, and like we have to get to that first.
It's true. This
This podcast is throwing a wrench in both of our like overall movie watching plans sometimes.
I know our like letterboxed ratings are all over the place now. Like my my
Yeah.
median star rating might be 2. Anyway. So really, basically, the long and short of all that was just to say that I was pretty fucking prepped for the Bone Collector, and
Well, as
especially,
was Hollywood, right? So like as you said, because it was kind of it was the 1-2 punch, right? But like Seven, obviously the knockout punch, but it's kind of like Silence of the Lambs also, like how seismic that
Mhm,
was
mhm.
at the beginning of the decade to sweep the Oscars. But like obviously like it was more Seven where everyone was suddenly like, "Ooh, we got to try and make something really dark like that and more kind of like procedural." So yeah, as we said, like we
Yeah.
just get this like glut of those, and Jeff, that's probably Jeffrey Deaver was like well poised to like sell the movie rights to this new book he had coming out.
Let's give a little bit of backstory on the book.
Hmm.
It's I mean the movie. I'll just say right now, the movie does a pretty good job at staying true to what the book sets up.
Yeah,
So
there's one particular like what I consider seismic change that I'll bring up later. But overall, yeah, I haven't read the book, but I read the beat by beat like synopsis of it,
okay.
and yeah, pretty close. There was one change I will, like I said, I'll discuss later, but they did a good job overall.
So the book is focused on two main characters, one being Lincoln Rhyme, who is a
Hmm.
quadriplegic forensic criminalist. He was involved in an accident a long time ago, crushed his back, and now he basically is bedridden for good, and he can really just move his finger and his like head.
Yep.
Um, he also considered suicide. Like it's pretty quick in the book for them to talk about him wanting to transition over, not in the way we talk about it now, but in the way of actually dying and having assisted suicide.
Hmm.
So basically he gets talked out of it because this bone collector case comes to him, and he decides to take it on. And he decides to take it on because Amelia Sachs in the book renamed Amelia Donaghy in the movie purely because Sachs sounded a lot like sex, which is funny that they changed her
To
name
those
because of
guys,
that.
sometimes when someone says that, it's like that's you're telling on yourself more than anyone else.
Yeah, totally, totally. But
Oh, it's
basically,
weird. They cast that's weird. They cast Angelina Jolie and suddenly sex sounded like sex. Hmm.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
But basically, she's an NYPD cop, and her work at the crime scene catches the attention of Lincoln Rhyme because he's like a famous forensic
Yeah.
criminalist, right? So he sees something in her, and she reluctantly becomes, his eyes and ears and legs on different crime scenes throughout the novels. So that's the two main characters, and then
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is I've never read any of the books. They kind of fall into that. It's funny because we're talking about like, how sometimes we appreciate these dad movies, but there's the thing about the books where they kind of fall into what I just always call like dad like lit too, like the
mhm.
the Tom Clancy's of the world, the Michael Connellys,
The
I'd say
Maxim
the Jeffrey.
magazines, the FHMs.
Well, no, like the David Baldacci's, like these
Yeah,
like
yeah.
really successful authors who put out like a book a year, sometimes like with co-authors because you realize they're like churning them out so quick they're just coming up with the plot or whatever.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
more of a James Patterson thing, not to throw that guy under the bus, but yes, I will. But yeah, like I just like they're like dad lit, and like it's not even that I have anything against them. It's just kind of like maybe because they are like so omnipresent and they're so overwhelming that these guys they're always being churned out that they've never seemed like super appealing to me. I also feel like the ones I have tried to read do read very formulaic. They're made to be. They're popcorn literature, right? They're made to
Hmm.
be read fast or like in an airport, or on vacation on the beach. So like I always think that the prose style is just so like formulaic. But all that to say, then you explain that plot you just did or the concept of the Lincoln Rhyme series, and that's a great hook. And
Oh yeah.
I think you know this about me, Chris, because we've probably talked about it before in some sense or whatever. But I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan, so it's funny that I'm talking about how I don't like all these like kind of detective-based series because I do. I'm like obsessed with Sherlock Holmes. I've read all the Doyle stories, and I read a lot of like continued Sherlock Holmes adventures. Watch a lot of Sherlock Holmes media, and just like so like obviously I'm a sucker for just the general hook of genius detective with a sidekick, right? That's something I'm
Totally.
always going to like. And that's what this is, right? Essentially, what if Sherlock Holmes was rendered quadriplegic and Watson had to do all the actual physical work, except in this case, Watson is a female NYPD officer. But yeah, just a great concept. And just it's like it reads tailor made for like movies and TV shows and obviously continuing books. So I'm not surprised it's continued to be successful even up to today.
And even the genre of the serial killer thriller is ripe for the two-hander of it, right?
Mhm.
Like we just talked about Seven, and that's Brad Pitt and Martin Freeman.
I'd watch
Uh,
that too.
yeah, sure. Was he in Doctor Who? He ever in those?
Oddly enough, I don't think he ever was.
He was
Maybe
in
if he was,
Sherlock.
it's
Was he in Sherlock?
yeah, he was Watson in Sherlock. Yeah,
That's what it was. That's what it was. Okay.
yeah.
But Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt, of course. But you have this kind of yin and yang to each other, right? And
Mhm.
somebody who is either the hard-nosed guy or the factual guy, and the other guy's the hothead, or it's the bad, it's good cop, bad cop,
Mhm.
So it's really it works really well. So I completely agree. Like before watching the movie, I don't know anything about it, so I did the research for the movie and the book, and right away I felt very in tune with something, at least like the hook was real for sure with
Yeah.
me. So how does this start? Other than the Seven copycat stuff and Philip Noyce being such a dependable director, even though he was coming off The Saint right now, um,
Yeah. But
Martin.
this happens so soon after the Saint that this is kind of like that there's that old maximum in Hollywood that makes sure you have your next job lined up while you're still working on the last one in case
Totally.
like that bombs. And that had to be the case here, right? I mean, it's just is like this I imagine it was either like almost immediately or even like while he was working on the Saint that he like leaps into this.
Well, isn't that interesting? He does Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, The Saint, and then this one.
Yeah.
Three or four fairly large films, I would say.
And that's the thing is like the Saint wasn't a huge hit, but it wasn't enough of a failure either that like he still has the success of the Jack Ryan movies, backing him up.
Totally.
So the
Totally.
Saint is not like a career ender. It's just a tiny stumble. We talked about how it was overall it did fine.
hmm
So
hmm
yeah.
But Martin Bregman is leading the charge of getting this movie made.
Producer Martin Bregman, yeah.
Producer, yeah, and he produces a lot of Al Pacino films like Scarface, Carlito's Way, but also The Shadow,
Hmm.
a movie we have talked about on this podcast.
Let us take a
Um,
moment and picture Al Pacino as the Shadow.
uh, he wants to get Al Pacino to play the role of Lincoln Rhyme.
Mhm.
Pacino is unavailable. They try to get Harrison Ford or Sean Connery, which I presumed this was the Jack Ryan connection, that they've hired Philip Noyce. Now they're looking for guys, and Harrison Ford and Sean Connery were kind of floated at the time. Not just because it was the late 90s and they're both huge movie stars, but that trio, there's a connective tissue there, no?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, like Sean Connery wasn't in the one that Noyce made. He was in
For
the
sure.
McTiernan one, but those are all, I mean, it's also just, in the mid 90s, Harrison Ford and Sean Connery are both still big stars too. So it just
Totally.
kind of makes sense. Like really all these names being floated are the names that would be floated out, right?
Yep.
So it doesn't surprise me one way or the other.
But Noyce eventually cast Denzel Washington.
Now that's
Heard of him?
interesting because I have heard of Denzel Washington. We'll talk about Denzel Washington in a second. You know what? Surprisingly enough, as a movie fan, I have thoughts about Denzel Washington. But
Interesting.
that's what is interesting is that you think of like, okay, so they're thinking of Al Pacino, then they're thinking of Harrison Ford and Sean Connery. Now I said I've never read the books, but I read that and it makes me wonder, do they ever mention his race in the books, or is it just not like said at all? Which could be the case. But that would lead me to imagine though that this is like an early case of they cast a black actor to play what was obviously they're originally envisioning as a white character, and the internet wasn't around yet, so no like crybabies had to have an internet meltdown about it and talk about how this is a DEI movie or too woke. So
Yeah.
that's nice, yeah.
But they cast him, and then for Amelia Donaghy, they cast a 24-year-old Angelina Jolie at the time.
Hmm.
Kind of new to the Hollywood world, but also really coming on the scene with the movie Gia,
Yeah.
uh, a movie that she really. for lack of better term, bears it all,
Hmm.
and really
Hmm.
puts
What do you mean?
herself
Say more about that, Chris. Say more
front.
about that. What do
Hey,
you mean
I
exactly?
already talked about my many a bones.
Oh, true. That's two. We've got two.
But yes, she has an odd I mean, she still continues to have an odd relationship with Hollywood, but especially when she started, I mean, she's kind of a nepo baby, right? Her dad is John Voight, estranged father John Voight, very
Hmm.
contentious relationship they've always had. Um, Again, a beautiful uh, actress in the midst of paparazzi life of Hollywood. Um, she always seemed uncomfortable with the fame. Hey,
I think so. Yeah. I mean, even more so after the mega fame that follows this, obviously,
yes,
like this is around the time where she's just emerging onto the scene. And for a little bit, it seems like, you go watch, early interviews with her, like even the interviews promoting this movie.
And then you had the Gia movie, and I read that you were going to just quit after that, that you wanted out.
I did. It took me a really long time to accept the part of Gia. My manager I think was gonna not work with me anymore if I didn't. He was so for me during this film, but I was scared of it because I thought it was such a challenge and so much to confront. And
Scared of it or ambivalent about acting?
well, that film was for those reasons. Ambivalent about acting after it because I felt like I'd exposed so much and I felt quite vulnerable after it, and I just didn't know if I had much more to offer because I needed to learn about life more. I needed to kind of grow up and feel like I had more to put out there, and I was just feeling very vulnerable. I mean, she suddenly is very exposed, but she doesn't have much in her life. She doesn't feel very centered or nurtured or have people in her. So I felt kind of like I was going to be out there and
Identified with it.
but not have a center.
You're not going to sour on acting again, I hope.
No,
It's going
no,
too well.
No,
It's going too well.
As long as people keep seeing the films and thinking
They
I'm
will.
okay.
They will. All right. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
All the
very
best to you.
much.
And I think in general, at that point, she still kind of sounds like someone who is like, trying to play the game a little bit. But then the level of superstardom that was kind of thrust on her after this, I think really did start to, weird her out. And she kind of lashed out in a way, like there was that kind of, again, definitely misogynistic thing about how male actors can be eccentric and everyone thinks it's fun. And if women like are eccentric, they're just called weirdos. And the press just loves to like make fun of them and drag them through the dirt. And that certainly was happening with her and during her relationship with Billy Bob Thornton and everything. So there was this whole like, oh, she's just so strange. She's such a weirdo. But yeah, like I remember it's strange to think of a time where she was an up and coming actress, right? Like we all saw her in Hackers in '95, and I think it was just like, who's that cute girl in Hackers? And then she was in a movie called Foxfire in '96 that I like quite a bit, but obviously not like a huge hit or anything. And just like little roles here and there. The Bone Collector really is like 1999 is a big year for her, right? Because she has a role in Pushing Tin, which is has some pretty big stars in it, John Cusack and Billy Bob Thornton, the aforementioned. She gets the Bone Collector, put as like, the second lead with Denzel Washington, already one of the biggest stars in the world right there, right? And then 1 month after the Bone Collector comes out, she had A Girl Interrupted is released in theaters. And that's the one that does it, right? Because she gets the Oscar for that. And now we're off and running. And like the next year, Gone in 60 Seconds, the year after that, she's Laura Croft, and she's just thrust in the spotlight and she is suddenly like the in-demand actress, one of the biggest sex symbols in the world. So it's whenever that fame kind of happens so fast, especially with women, it's not often positive for them, unfortunately. Just the way the media and the public kind of wants everything from them and wants to kind of chew them up and spit them out a little bit. But yeah, you could definitely see that talent early on. I certainly remember watching Gia on HBO back in the day too, for of course the acting.
yes.
Yep. And no, but really enjoying that movie and really, being kind of blown away by her in Girl Interrupted. And so it's always exciting. We talk about how there are still movie stars, but it's not quite the same. Our era of the movie star is still done, I think. And like how exciting it always was, those moments where somebody kind of came out of nowhere. Well, I shouldn't say she came out of nowhere because she was working for a while, but like when they blow onto the scene in such a big way,
Yep.
to go from Pushing Tin to being like, hey, and Gia, which is ultimately is acclaimed. I think she wins awards for it. It's still a TV movie, right? And to go from that to them saying, we think you're ready to co-lead a movie with Denzel Washington, like they would knew right off the bat, we have something special here. And they
for
were
sure.
proven right. You know, I'd say again, you asked me if Seven was a good movie. I'm going to make another huge claim here. I think Angelina Jolie's had a successful career.
Oh yeah, quite successful. And for that Seven connection, I mean, her and Brad Pitt become homewreckers during Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 2005. So
yeah.
And then Brad Pitt,
well, at least that ends
allegedly,
well, right?
allegedly became his own homewrecker. But
yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Speaking of different consequences for famous women versus famous men doing possibly brutal things. Yeah. I love Brad Pitt, but dude,
I know. No.
Dude, cool it, you know?
Yeah. Nope. But hey, because he's Brad Pitt, we're not supposed to talk about it. So
no, we're not allowed to talk
memo.
about it.
Yeah.
Not allowed to talk about it. Yeah. We got to make fun of Angelina Jolie having many kids instead, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, trying to, and like working for the UN and trying to get like landmines taken out of,
I know.
poor countries. Yeah.
But remember,
that's the thing about Angelina Jolie too. It's like I do love the narrative arc of her career though, and just her public persona, because it is really cool that she goes from, as you said, the kind of apprehensive, nervous, not sure I want to be a star to being like the media's favorite weirdo to write stories about how strange she is, to becoming a really important global player in like, elements of like peace and trying to like do really good charitable works. And I just love that now we all understand that. And it's been pretty great to see her like kind of rise above it and really like mature into this amazing statesman role, as well as being one of our best actresses. And that's the only sad thing about all of that, is that it means later on she kind of takes a step back from being a more active actress. We don't get a lot of Angelina Jolie movies anymore, which is too bad. But
the firefighter one was awesome.
It was.
That was great.
I'm
really
always
fun.
excited to see her. Like, and she's like, that's the thing, she can elevate like a B movie like that to still being something really, really fun, right?
Yep.
But if she wants to use that other time to try to save the world, I'm not going to like dismiss that. So
we talked very positively of her too in Salt from 2010, another Phillip Noyce film.
Yes, yeah.
So no, we are big Angelina Jolie fans. Can't say it enough.
Yeah.
Demi Moore or Nicole Kidman were supposed to be in it too, hey? In this one?
Which and at the time, that makes more sense, right? They're like definitely,
big time.
They're bigger stars. They're more marketable. And it kind of, I don't know the whole story of it. It says they were interested in them. It really does strike me as, and sometimes it's just the way it works in Hollywood, right? I'm guessing they said no. And it's just like, well, what do we do now? I don't know, get that HBO girl, and it's just funny that, like I said, they got her right at the right time, because they're just right on the cusp of her becoming like one of the biggest stars in the world. So
totally. Yep. Sharing the screen with another national treasure, Luis Guzman.
Well, I was going to say this for the review, but this is the thing too. Like, this is what's great about going back and visiting these like mid 90s to late 90s to early 2000s, as we would call them, right? These dad programmers, because you think of them as just like, these are mid-budget movies, right? These aren't blockbuster films. These aren't Marvel size blockbuster epics. And then you'd think, okay, so this movie was probably just never even made to be like, they weren't aiming to have this be their biggest box office hit of the year, right? This was just supposed to be like a little dependable programmer. But then look at this cast, Because beyond Denzel Washington and Angelina Jolie, you have Queen Latifah, Michael Rooker, Luis Guzman, Bobby Cannavale in a one-scene role, Ed O'Neill. It's like there's like just there's so many like character actors in this that are also the kind of actors that they just come on screen and you're like, I feel good now. They're just like it's all old dependables, So totally. Yeah.
I think we should just talk about the movie. We're getting there. We're getting so close. We might as well just get into it.
Let's do it.
Stay back until I work the crime scene, okay?
Detective Lincoln Rhyme was New York City's leading forensic cop. Until an accident disabled his body and destroyed his spirit.
9286.
Now, a killer with no mercy.
You heard about that couple that got in a taxi, never made it home?
Stop the car!
Found him dead, buried, hand sticking out of the ground with his wife's diamond wedding band shoved on one of his fingers.
And a patrol officer.
We got Officer Donahue here to thank for photographing the crucial evidence.
Will give him a reason to live.
I want you to work the case with us.
Forensics is not my area.
Are you being modest, or are you a little uneasy about doing some real police work?
He needs her to go where he can't.
Just tell me what to do next.
We don't want to disturb any footprints he might have left.
I can't do this.
Yes, you can. I'm with you every step of the way.
She needs him to interpret the clues.
Lincoln, I found a map of some kind.
Put what you got up on my screen. This crime scene was staged. There's no question the perp knows forensics.
Before the next victim is chosen.
Hey, I got a bad feeling about this.
Doesn't that kind of look like a face?
Third piece of the puzzle. She's gonna be near or in the Woolworth building.
Someone's in there. She's crying.
The perp could still be in there, for God's sake. I gave you so many clues, and you failed.
There's a killer out there. He's laughing at us.
I want this son of a bitch so bad.
Some people win, some people lose. The game is over.
Amelia?
Oh, God.
The Bone Collector.
Policewoman Amelia Donaghy is the first on the scene for a potential serial killer plot unfolding in New York City. Unable to decipher the cryptic clues and bone fragments the killer leaves at the scene of the crime, the NYPD turns to quadriplegic forensic criminology expert Lincoln Rhyme to help. Lincoln then appoints Amelia to take the lead on the investigation, having seen something special in her natural forensic abilities, even if she doesn't see it within herself. With Amelia acting as Rhyme's able-bodied go-between, the pair must piece together disparate clues and race against the clock, hoping to save the next victims from this gruesome plot.
That's right, The Bone Collector. Chris, if you don't mind, I'll go first on this one.
Sure.
Because I believe this was a first-time watch for you, right? You said.
Correct, yes. Yeah.
This is a revisit for me. I'd seen it, as I said, I don't know if I'd ever seen it from beginning to end. It was kind of one of those movies that would just be on cable, so I'd kind of pop in and out. But here's what I'll say about it. I'm so glad we spent so much time in the preamble talking about movie stars, right? And bringing up the concept of movie stars, because I think The Bone Collector is the ultimate testament to the power of movie stars. Because in a moment, when we get into our proper review, when we start discussing this movie and pulling it apart, I'm going to talk about how this plot is very silly, how there's a lot of logic leaps that you have to accept, how the mystery is both kind of easy to solve and also terribly written. How it takes shortcuts, how you can really start pulling this thing apart. And then I'll have to buttress it all by saying none of that matters, because you have Denzel Washington and Angelina Jolie sharing the screen. And every time they're on screen, which is 95% of the movie, this thing just sizzles. These two are just so good at what they do. And particularly Denzel Washington, right? The idea of there's not many actors in this, we said we'd talk about Denzel, and newsflash, I like him. He's good. and you realize how good he is when you ask, how many actors could spend the whole movie just laying in bed? As you said, all he can really do is kind of move his head a little bit, move his hand a little bit, move his fingers. And he's still just so commanding every moment on screen. You just can't help but watch him. He's still the power of Denzel still comes across. You believe him as this authority figure. You still believe anybody would do what he says, which is very important in the movie. And seeing a young Angelina Jolie kind of coming into her own as a star in this movie, and that's very, very appropriate to the character she's playing. They ultimately just save this movie from itself. And everything, I said, I'm gonna talk about some the story problems or anything, but it's actually still at the end of the day, it's a fun serial killer programmer. It's got some story problems which I'll dive into, but I just find this to be I'm not here to call this one of the greatest films of the 90s or anything, or some lost masterpiece, but for this kind of movie, this is what I was hoping The Saint would be. Just a good simple B movie, elevated by star power, directed well enough. Congratulations, Phillip Noyce. But I enjoyed this. I liked watching it back in the day whenever I'd come across it on cable. I thought it still held up. So yeah, this one falls into the win category for me. I'm interested to hear what you think about it.
Yeah, I was primed, as I said, to walk into this one. And I'm not even going to really bury the lead. I love this movie. I thought it was so good. It is such an awesome journey of a movie. With great pacing, an engaging mystery, awesome production design, and good use of city locations in this. Mm-hmm. But
one really bad use of day for night. But
correct. Yes, that's okay though. That's okay. Yeah. We're gonna look past that, yes, and we're gonna look past probably a lot of faults of this movie purely because the absolutely fucking perfection dynamic between Denzel Washington and Angelina Jolie. Their relationship of their two leads, their dynamic is just excellent. It's outstanding.
Yeah.
I think it was the best connection I've ever had to anybody on a film because of just simply that. There was just a stillness and an honesty that had to be there. And so much had to be communicated from here and inside than actions or touching and you couldn't turn away.
I love, you're so right. We didn't even really plan to say it that way, but talking so much about movie stars and how much they elevate, in other hands, little nothing burger movies, right? But there's not many people out there like Denzel Washington to sit there bedridden for the entire film and be just as commanding as he is in the scene and out of the scene. He's commanding to people in the room when they're there, but he's also commanding the scene when he's just talking through a fucking microphone. Like it's unreal. All reliance on his face, his eyes, voice, charisma. Like that's a fucking movie star. I can see why. Does it lend to a franchise? We will talk about that. Right. It's a character that is inherently less cinematic and maybe works incredibly well on the page because of internal monologues, feelings, thoughts, all that kind of stuff. So for a franchise, maybe an uphill battle. But what keeps this movie so propulsive, I wrote that down. 45 minutes into this movie, I said, this movie is so propulsive. I'm really into this race to save Mrs. Rubin. There's no fat. It's all gas, no brakes. And I think what's so beautiful about this, and when it gets to that moment where you do get to the, I guess, the second murder, Angelina Jolie's, her movie stardom comes out because she's so, man, her display of disgust, her display of empathy, her display of sadness, it's so gut-wrenching. And I love that as much as she wants to quit, as much as she doesn't want to do this job, Lincoln Rhyme sees it in her that she's made for this life. She is great at what she does, and she'll continue to be excellent at what she's doing. He continuously pumps her tires throughout the whole movie, even when she like, you know, gets mad at him or you know, disrespects him. He's like, "Nah, kid, you're gonna be amazing." And I love that dynamic. She's reluctant. She doesn't want to do this, but Lincoln sees it in her that she's going to be excellent. And the mentor-mentee dynamic is just brilliant. And I loved it. Like, I mean, we're going to get into more, but that's my quick thoughts. I just fucking thought it was awesome. This is a great movie.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. Like, yeah, and like I said, you said, like, there's a couple things we can pick apart, and we'll talk about like what doesn't work, but this is the kind of movie where you just watch and you go like, I don't care. It's just like, it's just fun from beginning to end. And you said like propulsive is a great word for it. It does not slow down ever. It's efficient, right? That's another word. Like, that's a Phillip Noyce special, just efficiency, let's just we don't have to like bog this down in unnecessary backstory. Like everything is done super efficiently, comes across like in dialogue, and it has that one of my favorite movie tropes where we learn everything we need to from Lincoln Rhyme about like a former friend of his telling someone about him. So we got the great scene where Ed O'Neill, who's his former partner, is like explaining what makes Lincoln Rhyme so famous and like what's so great about him to Angelina Jolie. It's like, yes, just more of that. I love that in movies, right? Where we get like the legend of someone from a colleague of theirs. And it's, stylistically, could it be like a little like, I think like Phillip Noyce is trying to go for some style here. There's a lot of like Dutch angles in this and things like that.
Oh yeah.
So it is like, it's a little bit more flashy than you might expect from him. Could he have pushed a little further to try and get even closer to that Fincher feel? Maybe, but also maybe he just knew what he had in terms of his stars and knew he didn't have to, because they're doing all the heavy lifting here. Really good time.
He kind of has a bigger picture, rather the entire picture in mind, and kind of covers all the bases in a way. And it's really just a great crew that surrounds him. I mean, he's got an excellent cinematographer and cameramen who are making it look exactly how it needs to look for it to, keep its intensity and move.
Yeah, and what a great intro to the movie too, hey? Like, just this great what the fuck effective opener of like Denzel going into presumably, what happened to him as an accident on the job. And he goes in and he turns over this dead body and it's him to himself. And then he wakes up in his bed and he's a quadriplegic. And then it cuts immediately to this couple getting kidnapped by a nameless cabbie. And the tension and escalation is just over the top. I felt like I was just like thrown into this movie. And that's something we talk about a lot in this podcast too, is that, like I said before, there's no fat. Like this movie just starts. And it doesn't like Ed O'Neill gives the backstory of Lincoln Rhyme, but it is a natural backstory. It is something that, okay, yeah, it makes sense that he would like tell Amelia about this guy. Like she asked, he told. It wasn't like a Star Wars text scroll of telling us what's going on. The movie is just happening, and Lincoln Rhyme is already famous. He's already written fucking 50 books. He is the best at what he does, and I think there's a special thing that happens in movies and narrative where you see people that are just good at what they do, and I think that's just so fascinating and so awesome. And you have the two-hander, the one of he's already amazing at what he does, but then you have him training somebody to be just like him. And I think the yin and yang of that, like we talked about before with these serial killer thrillers, I think it just works so well. And I cannot say enough about their dynamic. At points it gets a little romantic, and I'm not really into that, but
yeah, I was gonna add,
I'll get that out of the way. But
yes, that's one of my critiques, because you mentioned in your opening spiel about like the mentor-mentee relationship and how great it is, and I agree. And from everything I can tell, that's all it is in the book series. But of course, this is a Hollywood movie, right?
Yes.
So it dips too much into romance, and especially like the very like final moments of the movie, it's dipping way too far into romance, and I do not like that, because there's nothing about this dynamic that seems like it should head in that direction. It seems very out of character for both of them. Like that doesn't matter how great they are, what their charisma is, they can't quite make that believable, because it shouldn't be there on the page, so that's unfortunate. But everything else about the relationship really, really works. And you were mentioning the thing about like like that O'Neill telling the story and how that makes sense because she asks, and like the idea of characters doing their jobs really well and being kind of like legendary for it. This movie does that thing too, where just like it gives us small details that give us that information without having to harp on it. I love that there's even just a part where Ed O'Neill just briefly mentions that even after his accident, even after he was rendered quadriplegic, he can't be a cop anymore. But he mentions that like the police force in the city has basically just like left him on the payroll, like, and it's like they're not bringing anything to him. It's just like that's how well respected he is, that he did so much good for like the city and for like society that they're trying to pay it back and be like, look, we're going to keep paying for your medical bills. We're going to actually keep you on the technically you're still a cop. I just love that it's like just a small little detail that you could like miss, but you're like, oh, that's actually saying a lot about how everyone views him and how everyone treats him, except of course for Michael Rooker, who is playing another one of my favorite movie tropes, the asshole police captain who's mad when his underlings are doing their job well. Like,
I know,
you're solving this case, stop it. I love that as a movie trope, because it just never makes any sense, right? Where it's like, stop solving the case too well. It's just always funny. But Michael Rooker is just one of those actors who can pull it off, right? You just love to hate him, and he's really, really effective at it. Everyone's doing their job really well in this, like even beyond, so we keep talking about the two-hander of it all, and we will, but I love that for the bulk of the middle of this movie, it becomes this team. And I just like the scenes where the whole team is like in Lincoln's apartment and everyone's doing their job, right? And he's like, it's a command center, and he's the one in command, and he's giving everyone their orders, but he's not like snapping the orders. Everyone respects him. They just immediately do what he says. And as I've read, I'm not probably going to dive into the book series, but I've seen how there's multiple characters in the books that become like his team. And that's reflected here. And I love that. So like Louise Guzman's part of the team. Even Queen Latifah, who's really just his main medical caregiver, she starts helping out. The other detectives are helping out. I love that too. It's just these sequences of everyone working together to solve this. It becomes really, really fun to kind of see this ensemble play against each other in these command center sequences.
And introduces one of my favorite plot mechanics is the ticking clock. Love that. They have to get to these murders before they're happening. The serial killer is laying clues for them. And I just think it propels the movie to another level. You're never bored in this. It's a quick like hour 50, I think. And you're never bored. You're into this. You're mentioning the command center and Denzel is commanding everybody there. but he has medical episodes that happen to him
Yeah.
that are extremely scary. Very, very scary, very effective. Again, fucking movie star, you know? And how he switches it on and off, like how he'll be commanding the room, start breaking out into a sweat. And he's dripping, he's glistening. And Queen Latifah's there as Thelma being like, hey, Lincoln, stop. You're going to have to cool it. You're going to have to cool it. And he's like, no, we got to get this done. We got to get this done. And then he sets himself up for his own seizure. And he cries during it while he's just kind of like he's not even moving. He's doing so much in the bed. It's wild. It's wild.
I love Al Pacino. I love Harrison Ford. I like Sean Connery. I don't think any of the three of them could have done this as well, because what has always powered Denzel Washington's entire career is there's just an inherent intensity to him. It's in his eyes, it's in the way he holds himself, and it is in his stillness. Right? He does not have to be, he can be big, and obviously he likes to go big. We've seen that. But also he can just stand there and intimidate you and be powerful and be, scary, or just be like reassuring just through his eyes and his mannerisms. And that really comes across well here. He's like the medical episodes. The other thing I want to say about that is, what this movie has that The Saint didn't, that's very, very important, is we have two main characters who both have arcs.
Yes.
Our big problem with The Saint was that, Simon Templar as a character was pretty much in the same place at the end as he was in the beginning, no matter how much the movie wanted to act like there was an arc. There really wasn't one. And this, we have two character journeys. These two characters both feel very particular ways about their life and where they are at the beginning. And through working with each other, through being like reinvigorated by this case, through finding each other, they find a new purpose, and it completely changes their outlook on life to where one of them is no longer suicidal, and the other one accepts her role as this, she's questioning what kind of cop she wants to be because of her past and her past with her father as a cop who committed suicide. And just and now she's like, no, I found my place. I'm going to be this great detective working with Lincoln Rhyme. It all comes together really, really well. It's it's meat and potatoes, but sometimes meat and potatoes is the best meal, right?
Absolutely.
That's the thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I wrote this down here that not only does her dad commit suicide, but she's the one that found him.
Yes.
So again, now she doesn't want to be a crime scene forensic unit, which makes sense because she walked in as a young woman to see her dead father. So it's it all comes together into making her emotional reactions to, dead bodies or crime scenes really visceral. So it really, really I totally bought into it,
And even it informs her relationship with Rhyme, right? Because it starts, and the way I wish it stayed is it's very much a father-daughter relationship. And that's another key thing too about the importance of having an actor like Denzel Washington, because there are times in this where Lincoln Rhyme walks up to being an unlikable character in the way he treats Amelia early on. When he sends her into the first, I guess the second crime scene, but they know there's a body in there, and he sends her in there alone, which is kind of weird because, right, she doesn't have any experience in this. And when she says why can't the team go in, he's like, well, I don't trust them. And you're kind of like, I don't know. It seems out of place. It seems unfair. And then she's having a really hard time in there, and he's really, really pushing her. And he's in the wrong, I think. The movie is the movie's not telling us he's not, right? The movie is saying no, he's pushing her too much. And he plays it really well to where he that's very apparent, but it's still Denzel. So we're willing to forgive him later. We understand where it's coming from. He doesn't take it too far to where you hate the character. You just understand what he's trying to do with her.
He doesn't ever scream at her. He's direct, but he's not screaming at her. In that scene, she finds Mrs. Rubin, and unfortunately Mrs. Rubin is dead. And she's been steamed to death. So it's quite gruesome. It doesn't get to the extent that Seven did. But it's enough. It's gruesome enough. And also it works so well because you're focused on Angelina Jolie's acting, right? So that's what I meant by being so gut-wrenching when I said it about it before. But he tells her not only to go in by herself. I don't trust anybody else. I trust. I know they're gonna screw up the crime scene. They're gonna mess it up. You have what it takes. And so direct. She doesn't really want to do it, but he pushes her and she goes. But then he says, we need to get the prince off of the handcuffs. And Mrs. Rubin is again, steamed to death from a pipe, kind of, half melted, hanging there. And she needs to get the cuffs off of her without smudging the prints. And he says, cut her hand off at the wrist. And he's being very matter of fact and very direct. And it breaks Amelia. And Amelia's like, fuck you, I'm not doing this. And storms off. And a lesser movie would have Denzel scream at her. A lesser movie would have Lincoln freak out about it. But what happens is Lincoln internalizes it, or Denzel internalizes it. Then the next scene with Lincoln and Amelia, he doesn't quite apologize, but he talks about, in a very calm, soothing, fatherly way, that she has natural gifts, natural skills. She's going to be a terrific detective. And he's never going to give up on her. And okay, yeah, maybe, you know what? I probably shouldn't have asked you to do that. But you're going to know next time that that's might be what it takes to get the job done. And you're going to be better for it. And I just found that that's the moment where their relationship starts to cross, right? Because she's very emotional because of her past. He's very emotionless. You know, he wants to die. You know, he wants assisted suicide. Like right after this crime is done, basically that's his plan. So they have to meet in the middle for him to become more emotional and realize that, you know, these bodies are still people. They still had families. They still had responsibilities. They're not just crime scenes. And then she needs to harden up and realize her true potential, but not lose herself. And I find it's just a beautiful crux. I just loved it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll tell you this. If the power is there, if Denzel Washington asked me to go into a room and cut off a body's hand, I would do it. If Denzel Washington told me to go cut off a living person's hand, I would do it. If Denzel Washington asked me to fly to Canada and cut off your hand after this record, I would have to do it. Like, it's just he's just so it's like you said, he's just so powerful. I mean, we could there's other things to talk about this movie. We can't just spend this entire time going on and on about how amazing Denzel Washington is, but that is the key here. Like I said, it's incredible how entertained it is to watch a bedridden Denzel Washington and still see that and go like, that's just one of our greats. That's one of our undeniable greats right there. It's
even as simple as this: the next murder, okay, with the rat guy, okay, the rat guy murder.
How about that CGI rat, by the way?
You know what? It holds up a little bit.
It's pretty funny. It's there's a great a CGI rat leaping at the camera. Pretty funny. Yeah,
it's pretty good. It's totally like late 90s. Like, okay, hey, we're starting to get fur right on CG. Let's try it in this for no reason. But there's a moment when Amelia goes into that, right, and she finds him and finds the dead guy and scares off the rats, and then the cops come in, and like the cops go to her and be like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, I'm fine. Move so I can walk the grid. And then it cuts immediately back to Lincoln. He doesn't say anything, and Denzel just does this little smirk, and he goes, you know what to do. And just everything about that was just so fucking badass. And like you said, it's Angelina Jolie's charisma in showing her arc and how she can command the scene at the crime scene, but then cutting back to Lincoln, oh my god, it just works. Oh, we got to talk about something else. We talk about them the whole time. We got to move on. Let's move on. What I'm sure you have stuff to say.
I do. Well, okay. We can move on from how great of actors they are, because that's clear, right?
Yes.
Let me ask you an important question for this movie, though, Chris. Is Angelina Jolie too hot to be a cop?
No.
Okay, but let me.
I've seen hot cops.
I've seen hot cops too, but let me just make a point here. She is, like we've said, right? Angelina Jolie is one of those actresses who is just kind of otherworldly beautiful. And I'm not going to deny there's an element of we watch the movie and it's almost distracting. And if you think I'm saying I agree with Chris, obviously, cops can be attractive. That's not what we're saying. But if you think I'm the only person thinking that, you know who else is thinking that? The movie. Because it's very, very funny that there's a scene where out of nowhere, for just 10 seconds, they have to make a point to be like, oh, you were actually a model when you were younger? There's that one scene where the movie's it's kind of you can tell they're making the movie and they're like, oh my God, did you see this actress we cast? We got to acknowledge this. We have to acknowledge that she does not look like a New York City beat cop. And so they just throw in this one moment where the guy's like, oh, you were a model, huh? And I was like, oh, is that going to come up later? It never does. That was clearly just thrown there because the movie was hedging their bets. They're I don't know, man. We got to say something about this. That's so funny that was stuck in there. Yeah.
That's funny because you're right. She is otherworldly hot.
Yeah.
But also, does a man who looks like Denzel Washington decide to be a fucking forensic investigator? Come on. You know, like both of these, again, it's movie star. It's movie star, Fugazi. You know, it's just a bunch of bullshit.
Let me ask you this, Chris. Since we want to like move on from the two-hander of it all, who would you say is your other like MVP? Was there another performance that was your favorite? Because I would like I'll ask the question, I'll let you answer, but like Ed O'Neill, even though he's most known to the world for Al Bundy and then later like Modern Family, I've always thought there is something about Ed O'Neill where he's like really well suited to play a cop. They did this like 2-season reboot of Dragnet in the 2000s that he was in. He played Friday in that, and I really liked him in that, even though like the reboot wasn't successful enough to keep going very long. But I think he's like really, really effective in this. But I will say, I brought her up earlier. I think Queen Latifah rules in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Her relationship with Denzel is so great. Like their charisma together, and even just the way like she kind of becomes our introductory. Like she's the one who we start to see through her eyes, like his acceptance of Amelia and Amelia's acceptance of him, and how happy she is to see that this is bringing life back to, you know, not only her like her boss, and you know she's technically like a client, she's working for him. But she likes this guy. She doesn't want him to be suicidal. She accepts it. She's not going to get in the way of it. But she's so happy when she sees like this kind of like life come back to him and him take on this apprentice and him take on this case. And just the idea of her even becoming like involved in the case and getting active with it, even though it's way outside of her pay grade, I would imagine, and what she should be doing. I thought she was like the other MVP in this. Really, really loved her.
I agree. She's very protective of Lincoln and very warm.
We should say she's like his like live-in nurse, essentially.
Yes, yes. Thelma.
Yep.
The movie is very like it's a very direct, right? It's dealing with a lot of coldness. It's dealing with a lot of murder. It's dealing with a lot of gruesome imagery at times, right? And Queen Latifah just brings a levity to the movie and a sweetness, and I buy it. You know, I buy her as Denzel's live-in caregiver. I really do.
Yeah.
And friend.
Yeah.
Not just working for him, but a friend.
Yeah.
And
because she's got just like this warm presence as well, right?
Oh yeah.
So.
Oh yeah. What did you think of? You're a big fan of Taxi with her and Jimmy Fallon.
Never seen it, but I'm sure it's great.
Yeah.
What did you think of Phillip Noyce as man browsing books at bookstore?
Oh, that's funny. I didn't even realize he had a cameo.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Hey, let's talk real quick about we didn't really talk about this in the preamble at all, but how attentive Phillip Noyce was to getting the facts right in this film, and how much he set Denzel to talk to Christopher Reeve and talk to
and
other
and Queen Latifah. They both went and talked to him.
Yeah, and then other quadriplegics and forensic units, and even Angelina Jolie spent a lot of time with the NYPD and learning what women go through on the force.
And I myself spent a lot of time going out with the forensic guys from the New York Police Department's crime scenes unit, out to crime scenes, examining people who'd been killed, looking for clues, watching how they work, the meticulous way that they assess the evidence, save it, catalog it, and all that sort of thing. So there was a lot of research that took, 6 or 8 months before shooting started.
You can tell that there's a lot of care put in this, even if it does, we can dumb it down to some B movie serial killer thriller, Sunday afternoon dad movie. You know what I mean? Like you can say that, but also there's an underlying importance to get this right. And again, in lesser hands, a movie about a quadriplegic could be disastrous. It could be disastrous. You get the wrong actor doing the wrong, just even facial expressions or something. You know what I mean? Like that's why, like again, I'm talking about the acting again, but I think Phillip Noyce had a really firm grasp on what he wanted to accomplish with this film, which is weird though, because he's actually on record saying he's not a big fan of his work in this, which bums me out. He said he felt like he was just part of an assembly line because every studio after 1995 wanted a copycat Seven movie. And that kills me because, again, I just love this movie so much. And I feel like he's at his best doing something
Yeah.
like this. I just watched this week, or in the last 2 weeks, I watched The Saint, Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, and this. I'm noiced out, baby. And let me tell you, The Saint is where he should fucking be pissing on his own work. Like those other two, like Patriot Games is just so well put together. Clear and Present Danger, the way he moves the camera, the action, the helicopter stuff. It's so riveting. It's so great. It's in 50 different locales. And then he does this movie and it's so propulsive. Man, Philip, my baby.
It's a strange
Dude.
self-critique to hear, because obviously he's right to a certain degree that this movie was obviously quickly thrown together and the book was bought because everyone's like, we need a 7. You know,
Sure.
there's no doubt about that. But as we said, like that doesn't need to be a bad thing, right?
No,
Like this is
no.
still like it's kind of, and it's strange to hear because like as we said, and again, I don't mean this in a negative way at all. The majority of Philip Noyce's career is kind of these like mid-budget programmers. So I don't know why he'd be so dismissive of this one, which was ultimately trying to start a franchise, had big stars in it, has one star who's gone like immediately after this went on to become a mega star.
Yep.
It's just like
Yep.
and like forms a relationship. Like obviously they got along well enough to work together again on Salt years later.
Mhm.
So yeah, just I wish it bummed me out to hear that too, because I agree with you. Like you watch The Saint and then you watch Bone Collector, and then you hear this is the one where he's like, I think I did a bad job. It's like, what? What are you talking about?
Yeah,
You made
dude.
this is a fun movie, dude. Don't worry.
Yeah.
That like, do you think a little bit of that is like the critical reaction to the time, which as we said was like pretty down, and this is the thing too. Like, so we should acknowledge that because you said it wasn't very critically acclaimed, and I don't know. Is that just it's a little bit of like we didn't know how good we had it at the time, right?
Oh yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we were just getting inundated with these movies, and this is just like a pretty well done one of those. And people, I think, were so sick of them, and probably everyone was holding it to like the upper echelon of 7. Is it as good as 7? Well, no, it's not, right? But
Mhm.
like the further away we get from movies like this, you've heard, if you've listened to this podcast for a long time, you've heard Chris and I, or if you just listen to movie nerds talk for the last like 10 years, you've heard people talk about how we've lost something in Hollywood. We've lost a
Yeah.
particular kind of movie, this like, $50 million, mid-budget, movie that could still have stars, but is not meant to be like an Avatar or Star Wars or Marvel sized blockbuster. Just usually they were these kind of like little crime or legal thrillers. We've lost those. And this is the kind of movie you watch and you go, yeah, this is what we lost. We lost a day when like this could come out and be like, whatever, I guess we'll go see The Bone Collector. And then you watch it like, well, that's surprisingly good, or like surprisingly entertaining. And I just, man, we got to get back to this. We got to get back to these kind of movies where this should be in the multiplexes for when I don't want to go see some big CGI laden action fest. I just want to sit down and watch a good meat and potatoes thriller with actors who know what they're doing and a director who knows where to put the camera.
Well, I'm going to make a slight comp that you won't be familiar with because you haven't seen it yet, but you did reference it earlier. But a movie like The Fall Guy is a movie that really works on its star power alone. We'll say that too. It elevates the movie, right? It is a crime thriller as well as a big budget action movie. Now, the difference with that one is that it gets really big and bombastic and CGI and stunty and tongue in cheeky and all that stuff, right? Everything we're kind of inundated with every single movie nowadays. And I think if this movie was made today, it's The Fall Guy. You know what I mean? Like it's something a little bit more lighter. It's something a little bit more quote unquote fun. It's taken less seriously. The set pieces are bigger and wilder, and I think this one, what I liked and appreciated it so much, even in comparison to 7, because 7 is memorable because the sins, like the murders, are horrific, like really truly horrific. Some of them, which I'm sure we're going to talk about one for sure in spoilers, but they are very, very memorable and big. They're very larger than life. And I'm not talking about gluttony, but this one keeps it very simple. And like the first guy gets, is buried under the rubble. The other girl gets steamed. Another guy gets eaten by rats. There's like a drowning thing that's happening. They're very simplistic. And I think, like you said, a movie like this, meat and potatoes, sometimes meat and potatoes are the best meal you've ever fucking had. And that's what I think this movie's not trying to be Seven, I guess, in a weird way. You know what I mean? Like it is, but it isn't. Am I wrong by saying that? Like I feel like it is.
No, I know.
I feel like it
I know
does
what you
have
mean.
its own
Like
voice.
the studio wants it to be Seven, and I
Yes.
think everyone making the movie is fine with it being the Bone Collector. You know, that's the vibe I get, where they're like, no, we took a novel that has a very capable story that has this great hook, these two characters who are just such a great concept, a decent enough serial killer mystery, you know, and it's like we don't need to this, like I think the biggest, what you're picking up on, I think, is that this is not a movie. This is not a pessimistic or cynical movie. This is not a movie about the inherent ugliness of humanity. This is not a movie wallowing in the filth of humanity like Seven is. You know, you walk away from Seven and there's that moment at the very end where Morgan Freeman tries to have this like brief scrap of like some positivity and then admits even he can't. You know, that's like the movie just ends on like such a dour note, and like the whole thing was building up to this dour note. And this movie ends on positivity, right? This is a movie about two tortured, broken people coming out of it. You know, this darkness, them finding themselves in this darkness and being able to elevate themselves out of it through their shared connection and through, you know, saving the day and getting the bad guy, and like it turns things around, and there's glimmers of hope and a better tomorrow at the end of this movie. So that's where I agree with you that it's not trying to be Seven, because this is not a dark, pessimistic movie. This is a movie about dark things, but it's ultimately a movie that is more interested in like the best of humanity, right? You like everything about Lincoln Rhyme represents that, right? Like just as Christopher Reeve did. That's why it's great that he sent him to talk to Christopher Reeve about that, right? About the idea that your life doesn't end because this happened to you. And he has to learn that as a character. And it's great to see him learn that and see that, yes, you still have value. In fact, you still have the same value to all these people. You can still do the same thing. You just need more help, and that's fine. And help is okay. You know, and so it's all so positive. And I know I'm like waxing poetic about the Bone Collector, but that's what's
you're
cool.
waxing your bone.
Definitely when Angelina Jolie is on screen, yeah. But it's you know, to be poetic about it, it is a simple little B movie, but it does have this at its heart, and again, that's what elevates it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Going out with those guys was the key to one very important part in the movie, and it's the part of the film where the character played by Angelina finally realizes the point of all of this, and that is to catch the guys, the people that did it, the perpetrator, to get them, to make them pay. And I think that that's an important process for anyone who's working in law enforcement, you know, because that's why they're doing it. Not to protect so much as to find perpetrators, because there is something. It's not just that you have to act after the event. You know, the key to that job is acting and stopping something happening in the future.
Okay, so I was so engaged for 95% of this film, and I just loved 95% of it. There's 5% of it that we need to talk about, and it's going to be heavily spoiler filled. We've done our absolute best to not ruin the movie for you. If you haven't seen this 25-year-old film, rush out. I guess right now, should we say? Did this deserve sequels? Let's talk about that right now. That's a question that we ask ourselves. Trev, did The Bone Collector deserve to have sequels?
I don't, you know, deserve is always a tough thing, but I'll say yes. I think it should have had sequels, and because I answer that based off of the fact that I would like to watch these two together more. My only caveat to that would be I would hope the sequels would drop the romance element and just stick with mentor mentee, you know, her being his assistant. But yeah, I come away from this being like, I could have watched more, as long as it's just a bunch of like $45 to $50 million you know, movies about these two taking on future serial killers. I would have watched a trilogy or more of this. So yes, I recommend this movie, and I think it deserves sequels. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only thing that would be very hard to accomplish going forward is kind of what I talked about before, being this is just a less cinematic character to have Lincoln Rhyme. That would be very hard to do. But what's even harder, and again, we're in spoilers, everybody, it's hard to replicate the character arcs that have gone in this film because Lincoln has come back from suicide and Amelia has has become his number one. So it's like what was so awesome to watch in this movie and the dynamic played against each other was them helping each other out and finding that crux in their relationship to go forward. And I think that was very, very interesting. Now, in sequels, is it just them being fucking superhuman fucking forensic unit? You know what I mean? Like that is maybe what we would butt up against going forward. So
you'd almost have to expand their team more and have to like focus on different characters each time,
more quadriplegics, like just like a team of them,
maybe.
A team of them. No, you didn't like that joke?
Hey, go for it.
Okay, so yes, resounding more sequels. I would have loved to see them go forward. Sucks that we didn't. Even though I'm getting ahead of myself here, but in June of 2023, there was a little bit of talk about a sequel in the works. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but
no, it won't.
It won't. It won't. Okay. Spoiler. Two things I really don't like about this movie. The 5% that I don't like about the movie. Them killing Thelma off screen really made me mad, and never ever talking about it later. It's almost like
you don't like where just a few weeks later they have a Christmas party right where Thelma was killed.
And they don't even mention her name.
I know.
Like, hey, Lincoln, at least turn to Amelia and say, "I wish Thelma was here." like that basic bare bones script writing. Just do that, because I felt it was very unceremonious. Queen Latifah was in a lot of ways the beating heart of the film. A sense of positivity and just the closest confidant of Lincoln until Amelia has entered the scene. So it just felt like we kind of just traded her in. So didn't like that. And I just felt the ending in general and the reveal of who the killer was doesn't work that great for two reasons. One, it's pretty bold of a film to show you the killer's eyes right away in the very beginning of the film. We didn't talk about this, but there's a really long hold on the killer's eyes underneath their balaclava, and then the movie starts to cast really blue-eyed men. So we talked about Michael Rooker playing kind of an asshole. So you're thinking, okay, well, it's obviously Rooker, right? And there is a bit of a bait and switch, but there's also a casting issue here that basically spells it out immediately. If you've seen Seven, they hire they cast the lusty knife pants fucker.
The great Leland Orser. I love Leland Orser. Yeah.
Same here, but he always, because of that movie, it like kind of typecast him a lot, and the movie almost immediately after, as a copycat movie to the movie where he plays one of the most fucking eerie, disgusting performances of that film that really sticks with, I think, all of us. The moment you see him, you're like, oh yeah, it's probably that guy. And then it does turn out to be that guy. And he goes on kind of this rambling monologue as to why it's almost like a supervillain thing. He does the monologue, and he's like kind of rushing through it. And the movie's kind of rushing to kind of wrap up. And I felt it didn't really work the way that they wanted it to.
So yeah, I have problems with this as well. And it's kind of twofold for me, because I don't like, so to your element of like, you watch it today and you see Leland Orser's name in the opening credits. And you said, you still have to be a particular kind of movie nerd to know who Leland Orser is. Yes. Like I think general audiences still don't. But you're right, in that 1999, he's not only coming off Seven, like a really haunting, effective one scene role in Seven.
Oh my God, yeah.
But then in 97, he's in Alien Resurrection, which again, it wasn't, an underperformer, but he's kind of a scene stealer in that, as like the character who is like, they're carrying him around, but he's infected with an alien. He's got the chest burster. I got him. So he's got or he's got a chest burster inside him. And then ultimately he kills the character by holding that character's up to his like chest as it comes out. Right. But he's a scene stealer in that as well. So coming off of those two, you would watch this maybe and go like, I don't know, that's kind of strange how he's barely in this. But that's the problem. See, this movie falls into what I've often called non-mystery mysteries, which can sometimes work, but sometimes they're just aggravating. And that is movies that act like a mystery. They, they position themselves as a mystery, but when the ultimate reveal comes, there's nothing about anything early in the movie that would have allowed you to guess that. My ultimate example of this is the first Friday the 13th film, which positions itself as a whodunit. And then Mrs. Voorhees shows up and gives her whole monologue, and you realize that like, oh, there's no reason I would have thought it was this character because I'm being introduced to this character right now. That's not fair. There's more like locked room mystery, something like a Knives Out or something where if you pay close attention, maybe you can figure it out. But there's these non-mystery mysteries, which they have someone show up at the end and go, it was me all along. And you're like, okay, well, the movie never allowed me to guess that.
Yeah.
But I think as I watched this movie, I thought, and I don't know if you picked up this as well, even if you don't know who Leland Orser is, right? Even if like he's not an actor on your radar, I think the movie's failing is that it gives away who the killer is just by the presence of this character he plays. Because we're introduced to him in an early scene where he's like a tech who works on the bed that Denzel Washington is in. He's the guy who like works on his heart monitor. And he has this one moment where he says like, well, your heart monitor is like, it's broken. I got to go get you a new one. And then he leaves. And you're like, okay. And then later during one of the command center scenes we talked about, everyone's in the apartment. Everything's going like they're all like working really hard to break this case. They're all doing different things. And he walks in and he's like, oh, what's going on? And Thelma's like, no, don't worry about it. Just like, and he fixes the monitor. He's like, all right, see you later. And he leaves. And I'm sorry, but just by the cinematic language, I'm like, why would you have that character come in and do that? Well, there's no purpose to it, right? There's no reason to steal any moment of screen time in that sequence for this like minor character unless they're going to come back later. So I think that's the bigger problem is that to me, it's given away just by the presence of that character. And then my other issue with it, as you said, and this gets into what I mentioned earlier about how there was one significant change from the book. So you didn't read the plot description of the book at all?
No, nothing.
Okay. The killer, I'm going to read you this paragraph from the Wikipedia breakdown of the novel, right? And then we're going to compare that to, so we should say like once the reveal comes in the movie, we find out that this tech, this guy who Leland Orser plays, who like works on Lincoln Rhymes' bed and works on his heart monitor, he was actually like a police forensic scientist himself who was sent to jail because he had falsified some evidence that sent some innocent people to prison, and Lincoln Rhyme discovered that and kind of and wrote about it, and it was revealed that he was doing this, and he was sent to prison because of it, and now he's seeking revenge. Now let me read you the version from the book. The killer is Peter Taylor, Rhymes' doctor. Real name, Colin Stanton. He lost his family years ago when Lincoln failed to fully check out a crime scene. The suspect was hiding under a bed and started a shootout in the street, gunning down Stanton's family. Stanton subsequently had a breakdown and was admitted to a hospital where he attempted suicide. Once released, he planned to murder a now quadriplegic Lincoln Rhyme and created the identity of Peter Taylor. However, when he realized that Lincoln was becoming suicidal, he had to give him a reason to live so that he could murder him. So he took on the alias the Bone Collector and began copying the crimes of a famous New York serial killer from the early 1900s. Picked his victims at random and thought of them as Schneider's own. So this idea that like it's all to like make Lincoln Rhyme like full of life again, so that it's like more
tear him down,
like wonderful revenge. Yeah, I love that. That's so good.
Yeah,
and it's so much better than what we get in the movie, because the movie is just like this simple like, I'm just out for revenge because you sent me to prison for something that I was guilty of. It doesn't have the same power. Leland Orser is really funny in that, or like he's great in that sequence. Like he goes for it. It's over the top. It's really fun to see how Noyce films like a fight between a quadriplegic and a quite able-bodied person. Like it's a good sequence. But yeah, like the reveal lacks oomph because this character means nothing to us, and I don't know why they made that change. Like it's right there, right? The movie is all about how Lincoln Rhyme is suicidal and he's now like discovering his life. And ultimately, when you break it down, the character's plot in this makes no sense. The bad guy, like think of everything he had to do for his evil plan to make sense. He had to get a new identity. I would assume he had to get like a new medical license to be allowed to work, on this guy's heart monitor.
Had a few more job interviews.
Yeah, he had to find a cab. Maybe he had to get a taxi driver license, all under this new identity. And then all I could think about too is like, how did he even know for sure that anybody would bring that first evidence to Lincoln Rhyme from the first crime scene? There's no guarantee of that. So it doesn't, when he's like, yeah, I did all this to see if I could beat you, to see if you could solve these crimes. What if they had just never brought that to Lincoln Rhyme? His whole plan would go to shit. It's just like, that's where I mean, like, that's where the script is like, you think about it for like a second, you're like,
Yeah.
we got some problems here. Yeah.
Again, it's rushing to an ending that it never set up in the first place. And
Yeah.
and like you said, the book synopsis is great. That's excellent. That's awesome. And we know that this movie was pretty rushed into production, obviously, like we said, for reasons.
Mhm.
And then also it had a script polish and then also was condensed. So perhaps there was more in the original edit, and the movie was just really hanging on with Denzel and Angelina that they're like, we just don't want to take away from any of this. Who knows? I'm making things up probably, but it just feels weird that they would completely excise that out, even from a script level. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because Leland Orser's scenes earlier on are so shoddily like put together. Like he's just so it doesn't flow. Like right away, I felt it. You know what I mean? Like I felt his addition to those scenes. Also, I do the editing for this podcast, as a lot of you know, but I put the trailer as usual, you know, right before we talk about our review. I almost didn't put parts of the trailer because it uses major lines that Leland Orser says to Denzel at the climax in the trailer. So it's like, I understand Leland Orser is not a household name and people don't understand his voice. But again, guys, this is playing to the Seven audience. And he has that scene in Seven that you just is immediately iconic and terrifying and sticks in your brain. So I don't know. It's just
Well, here's why it's
crazy.
okay
It's
though,
weird.
right? Because we said like I sometimes I'm bothered by those what I call non-mystery mysteries,
Mhm.
but it's more when the movie is really positioning itself and acting like it's a whodunit, and it does that. It always feels like kind of a cheat. And I guess the one thing you can say about this movie is because ultimately when you watch the entire thing, you realize like I guess it wasn't really trying to be a mystery. Like it wasn't so concerned in that. Like as we said, like the strength of this movie is the character arcs of the two protagonists.
Yeah.
So like it allows you to be a little forgiving at the end to say like, okay, that's not the best reveal. You know, maybe there's no reason I could have guessed that, but that's ultimately not the point. You know, so I walk away from it. It's a bummer. It's a bummer that there's not a better reveal and that we don't get like a really cool iconic villain. But like I said, we get a hammy Leland Orser and like a fun sequence with the two of them, and it you know it works effectively on that level. Was there a moment where when Denzel Washington hits that button that says activate bed emergency mode, did you kind of hope that the bed would like guns would pop out of it, or it would like like have like rocket boosters in the back and like fly out the window or something? That's what I was hoping. Turns out
Or
it's
it-
just like it just calls 911 or whatever. But
Yeah, I was hoping it just like kind of splits apart and he becomes like a robo-bed.
like a
you know?
mecha, like he's they got like mecha legs.
Yeah. He's like the
"I'm
power.
saving this."
He's like the power lifter from fucking Aliens. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, so like that, I'm actually with you in that. Like that all is not great, but because Leland Orser's fun and because the actual sequence between the two of them is entertaining, I'm forgiving of it.
Oh,
I
yeah.
am less forgiving of the entire dismissal of Thelma's death. Like that's
Yes,
like I
same.
think the what sticks in my craw a little more at the end of the movie.
Yeah. I guess before we talk about what we have planned for the ending of this episode, because I
Mhm.
want to connect this movie even more, I want to ask you. You mentioned it earlier about how they tried a TV show recently.
Yeah.
And I know we're wrapping up, so I just kind of want to get to this. Did you have any inclination that this was a thing at all?
I remember, yes, I do remember when that happened. I remember
Okay.
seeing like ads for it online. Never watched an episode. You and I have talked recently about in recent years, you and I are very skeptical to start any new show and bother with it. And
Yeah.
especially like all these like IP shows that are driven and something like this too, where it's just like, oh man, they're taking this movie like from a long time ago, dusting it off, and they're like redoing it. And even like the TV show was called Lincoln Rhyme Hunt for the Bone Collector. It's like, come on, it's too wordy of a title. Just call it either the Bone Collector or call it Lincoln Rhyme. I just knew it wouldn't last, and I was right. It got canceled after just one season, which I would just like I said again, I don't know, because I'm kind of with you that maybe that's too bad, maybe not. There's that part of me that I think like it would be better suited for a movie franchise because of what you were saying right earlier about how I know shows like Criminal Minds and things like go on for years and years and years, but there does come a point where you're just like, how many serial killers can these people be, finding? So I'd rather just see like 3 movies with like 3 really cool villains that they're taking on than maybe watch it every week,
Same.
But
Same.
yeah.
I
But
thought it was
what's interesting is Noyce did consult on it.
Yeah, but declined to direct the first episode.
Yeah.
And I like that he said they made mistakes in their casting. And what I was kind of alluding to before, if this was made today, it'd be maybe like The Fall Guy. He said, hey, they tried to lighten it up. And that's the world now. Like we kind of, Hollywood in general is a little afraid to take on a movie like this or Seven. A movie like Seven doesn't get made today, I don't think.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't. It's too nihilistic. And you don't get actors of that caliber in it. You may get some fucking B-grade streaming movie that has that nihilism to it, but you're not getting Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt. There's no way.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd get Kevin Spacey, actually. I take that back. Let's move on to what we have planned for the end of this episode, okay?
Sure.
And I watched this movie a couple days ago, and it ends at Christmas. Right.
Yes.
And it's very, as Trev says, it's very optimistic. It's very nice. I don't exactly, or we both don't exactly like the romantic angle that's happening. However, that's what it is. And also they don't talk about Thelma's death. That's annoying, but it is Christmas time and they're exchanging gifts and they are having a happy-go-lucky time. Now,
yes,
we, as usual, we program this show fucking months in advance.
Yeah.
Like, we're about to program all of 2025 in the next couple weeks. So this was on the docket for a long time, and the movie ends at Christmas. Now, listeners,
which I guess means it is like a Thanksgiving movie, even, right? Like, it must be taking place around Thanksgiving time. Yeah, so
for sure. So it totally works out. And as listeners know, sometimes I believe in the Matrix, and this is one of the best Matrix moments of all time because, listeners, every year around Christmas time, we hold a theme month, and we call it Trev and Christmas. This is where we gift each other a movie where we both obviously don't know what it is because we're gifting it to each other. And that's what we're going to do right now. So not only did this movie take place, I guess, around Thanksgiving, which is right now, it ends on Christmas, and we're going to do Christmas stuff. And it blew my mind, and maybe it's not blowing your mind right now, listeners. But holy shit, I rarely text Trev after watching a movie, but right away, I was like, oh my God, how perfect is this? So,
yeah. I can only apologize to you, though, Chris, because I know that getting a Christmas present from me is not as exciting as it would be to get one from Angelina Jolie. I apologize for that. I mean, I can come over and hold your hand like she does with Denzel Washington at the end if you want. Do you think that'd be as exciting?
Do I need to get up? Okay. Trev, I mailed it to you. I hope you can see it. You got your gift in front of you?
No, I got it. Yeah, no, it definitely showed up. Yeah, so I'm just gonna start tearing this off and get this paper out of the way. I mean, I'm gonna be really gentle. I like to save my wrapping paper here.
My man. Economical and environmentally friendly.
Yes, of course. Okay, interesting. Well, tell me about it, Chris. Tell me why this.
Okay, so it's Christmas time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're a boy. And when you're a boy, you may have played with these when you were young. And also, you've mentioned this movie a few times while we record that you can't wait to get to it. So I'm gifting you 2016's Monster Trucks.
I thank you so much. As you said, you're dead right. I don't know why. I can't explain it. It's got some actors that I like. Maybe that's it. But this is a movie for some reason I've been thinking for years I actually want to watch. So We'll see. We'll see if that was stupid of me. Maybe, probably. But we'll find out.
Okay, I'm glad you like it. It came to me almost like in a dream. I was like, oh man, he's gonna love Monster Trucks. So there you go.
Know what? No, not only do I love it, I think it's kind of. I don't know. I feel like it's going to pair well with what I sent you, Chris. So hopefully that arrived
Sweet.
As well. So,
okay. Yeah. No, I got it right here. Okay. All right. I don't like saving my wrapping paper. I actually
tear that shit up.
Yeah. I'm gonna not only am I tearing it apart right now, I'm gonna light it on fire and get those get the ozone going. Get that old chestnut. Oh wow. Okay. Sweet. Look at this.
Yeah. So, Chris, I was just thinking, in recent months, you and I have had some real ups and downs with this show. We've had some movies we've enjoyed, like The Bone Collector, but we've also had some real bummers. Our Adventures of Tintins, our Saints. Our Doug's first movie. We've had some rough going. So I was just thinking mostly that I just wanted to make sure December was fun for us.
Nice.
And I was like, we want to find movies that are just fun. So, ironically enough, you picked a 2016 family kind of action sci-fi movie. And I picked a 2017 family action sci-fi movie, another movie I think both of us have wanted to do and weren't ever sure we'd find a great theme for it. But I'm giving you 2017's Power Rangers.
Yes. Yes. I've been waiting to do this with you for years now.
It's one of the first movies we talked about when we talked about this podcast. So
this has been my backup gift to you for a couple years now.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yes. Awesome. Great. Okay, this is gonna be a great Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I'm really looking forward to both of these. Yeah. So, December 17th, 2016's Monster Trucks. December 31st, we're doing 2017's Power Rangers. That's awesome. That's gonna be a really good month.
But wait, Chris, that leaves a gap in there somewhere.
Oh yes.
What is?
Are we still talking about Angelina Jolie?
Does that count as a Bone Collector joke?
Yes.
Let's just take it. Yeah.
Yes, December 3rd, we have a blank spot. We decided, we didn't really get too much horror stuff in the month of October, just because of our animation stuff. So, well, some may say that was horrific, but especially, like Final Fantasy.
Tintin, different kind of horror. Yeah.
So we decided it's been a while that every once in a while, listeners, we like even more positivity, right? So we're ending this podcast, with positivity like The Bone Collector did. And we call this subset of episodes called Success to Series. Yes. This will be our 5th incarnation of this. We've done Rocky franchise. We've done the James Bond franchise, where we just kind of celebrate these franchises and why they are successful and why they've stood the test of time. So it's kind of like, it's just a lot more positive, and we like to do that every once in a while. So, Trev, what are we doing?
We are doing, and I know this, you love to talk about your Matrix theory. We have to talk about an unfortunate one with this one, but
oh yeah, right. Way to bring it down after I just.
Well, no, but we'll keep the positivity going, because it'll be a great tribute, a great legacy tribute to one of the stars of this franchise. We are doing the Final Destination franchise. One of the kind of star horror franchises of the early 2000s, and one that I know you and I have talked a lot about. One that's very, very. It's interesting because I would say it's like one of the most unique horror franchises, right? Because it's kind of falls in that slasher territory, but really there's nothing like it in terms of its like concept and what it's aiming for. And like it hasn't been like overly, there hasn't been a lot of attempts to like replicate it, because it's just so singular in what it's doing and what it's positioning. So I think it's gonna be like a really, really fun franchise to talk about. It is kind of sad, unfortunate, but we will take the more positive side and say, while we were doing this, like just recently, we lost the great Tony Todd, star of Candyman, the 90s Night of the Living Dead remake, and a very crucial supporting character in the Final Destination franchise. So we will treat this episode as not only a celebration of Final Destination, but also a celebration of the great Tony Todd.
For sure.
Yeah.
December's gonna be awesome. Success to Series number 5 with Final Destination. Then we're moving on to Trev and Christmas. Oh yeah, I have to do the end.
Yeah.
And to do so, follow along at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2F Pod. That's on all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. A star rating would be great. And just join the tribe and hit that subscribe. And we'll have I was going to say a gay old time, but a merry old time? What do we say?
I can think of those that both work.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, have a Gary old time. Let's go for Gary. Gary, like that. You know what? Let's do that. Let's just create a new thing. Have a Gary old time. We'll just combine the two.
Yeah, TM, Trev and Chris.
Chris, do you think for a movie called The Bone Collector, were there enough bones collected? I was kind of disappointed that there wasn't more bone collecting in the movie, honestly.
I will say about halfway through, I didn't realize that there was any bone collecting at all.
Yeah. I'd say more bone collecting in a movie called Bone Collector, please.
Yeah, yeah. Just pop on a copy of Gia.
It worked for me when I was a teenager.
And later on today. All right. Great. Okay, let's fucking save this.
Yeah.
Oh my God.